Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, as you can tell by the title, so I know that this is something that a lot of people have been messaging and kind of emailing about, and there's this idea of kind of almost hitting plateaus and feeling stuck. Okay, so from my kind of experience from kind of tutoring students and from having done the Ucat itself, I feel like there are three kind of main plateaus that you might hit. Some of you may not have hit the earlier plateaus, some of you may be on some of the earlier ones, some of you may be on some of the later ones, but I thought I would talk about all of them specifically, and then see if some of these things apply to you and some things you can do to potentially even overcome them. Okay, so the first thing is obviously when you start, because I'm going to do it in chronological order. So the first one is when you're starting off, obviously the Ucat is just so completely different to anything else. You have no idea what's going on, right? And I guess this is less of a plateau and more of just a feeling stuck. It's kind of like, what is happening? Okay, and you're going to be very clueless, and you're not going to be sure exactly what's going on. Okay, and that's totally normal. So what are you going to do? So first thing that I would recommend is really important to understand the different styles of questions. Okay, understand how to do them. So that's techniques and tips. And obviously, once again, here I'm going to shamelessly plug my own channel. But if you guys, if this is the first video you're watching from my channel, please do go and check out my playlists where I've uploaded specific techniques for each of the sections, as well as some walkthroughs, and I'll be updating this in the upcoming days. Okay, so that's the kind of main idea. You've got to be able to understand the different styles of questions that's happening, and there'll be some styles of questions which are just so unfamiliar, or things that you're just really not used to doing. So an example of this is syllogisms. So those are the questions where they give you a bunch of statements. It'll be like A is B, B is C, C is not D, and they'll give you some kind of conclusions to try and draw up. So it will be like some A is D, whatever. So those kind of questions, they're just so different from anything you've ever done, right? The Ucat is just such a different example from anything you've done at school. It's not about learning as such. It's just about like different techniques and how to apply them. So it's really crucial that you're able to understand these techniques and how to apply them and how to solve these questions. Okay, and therefore you kind of need to have a method for most of these questions. And like I said, I've simplified most of the key areas, and especially in decision making, I've broken it down into 6 clear sections. You guys can go and watch those videos and you can see how I would do those questions. So that's one thing, understanding the different questions. But I guess as an overarching idea is also understanding how the subtests work. Okay, so what that basically is obviously, as you know, in the Ucat there's 4 key subsections. SJT, you get banded, so band 1 to 4, 1 being the highest, and the others you get a numerical score out of 900, which is then added up to give you a total score out of 2700. So that's QR, DM, and VR. So it's also important to understand how they work in terms of, okay, so in VR every question is worth 1 mark, in QR every question is worth 1 mark, in DM not every question is worth 1 mark. So just kind of understanding the general ideas. Also, I would say, for example, SJT is probably the least time pressured, okay? Whereas something like VR and DM require you to, VR, DM and QR require you to be a little bit more on the ball, okay? But it's important to understand how they work, so like you have a rough idea of exactly what you're facing. And so this kind of like starting bit is a bit of a hurdle for people to overcome, because it can be quite challenging going from like A-level content where, you just have to learn it and do practice questions, to the Ucat where it's just like, oh, the question seems quite simple, but I actually kind of can't figure it out, or I'm just taking too long on it. And so therefore the only way to do that is, like I said, familiarize yourself and understand the best ways to do questions and the most efficient ways to do them. And hopefully and I'll bring up this idea of pattern recognition a little bit later as well. But the idea is that once you understand how to do a certain style of question, when you see it again later, you'll be able to use the exact same logic. So whether it's for syllogisms, you'll do it this way. If it's recognizing assumptions, you're looking for the clause, or for non-clause questions, you're looking for keywords, etc., etc. If these words don't make sense, like I said, if you go to my playlists and watch them, I've kind of comprehensively gone through each of the different areas. Okay, so this idea of pattern recognition is important because that's ultimately what the Ucat boils down to. It's about when you see the question, you know exactly what to do. And you can only do that if you do enough practice. Okay, so the second kind of plateau, or like feeling hopeless kind of area, is when you switch to time practice. So at first, people will normally do a bit of untimed practice just to get used to the questions, and that's fine. But I would really recommend that you switch to time practice as soon as possible. So that's the first point. And the reason why I say to do that is because the timing is what makes the Ucat hard. Okay, it's not necessarily only the questions. Like, yes, some of the questions are tricky, and if you don't know the right techniques to do them, fine, that's fair. You'll never be able to get it right. But like I said, hopefully at this point you will have understood some of the techniques and tips and tricks. So now it's just about getting faster with it. And you got to switch to time practice because it's the timing that kills you, right? That is what it is, for most of the sections anyways. So you just got to switch to that time practice, and you have to get that feel of how things are going. And yes, in on-time practice, if you're doing really well with the questions, let's say in QR you're getting like 10 out of 12 right, it takes you a little bit longer. When you switch to time practice, you'll be in for a bit of a shock because you'll probably get much lower and you'll probably not be able to finish some of the later questions or whatever. But that's totally normal. And the only way to kind of develop that skill is, like I said, the Ucat is very much about practicing. It's about learning on the job. So you kind of just have to jump into that time practice. And so this next bit is really, really important, which is practice in the appropriate section timings. So for VR, that would be 22 minutes. For QR, that would be 26 minutes. For decision making, that would be 37 minutes. And then obviously SJT is also 26 minutes, I believe. Okay. The reason why I'm saying this is because if you think about it this way, what a mistake that some people make is they do like 5-10 minute practices of each section. That's fine, but it's not really representative of the whole thing. In the real exam, obviously, in VR, for example, you have to do a 22-minute VR. So doing a 5-minute doesn't really get you up to speed, right? So think about it like this. If you are running a 1,500-meter race, okay, you're not going to just run 400-meter warm-up laps, right? You're going to have to run 1,500 meters before your whole thing. So the earlier you can get onto that 1,500 meters, the better, because then you'll be more in tune and in practice. So if you guys are watching this and you're on this time practice stage, and if there's any of you guys that are doing 5-10 minute practice, I would really recommend against it, okay? Just do the full section timing. And therefore, what that enables you to do is it enables you to think about things like exam technique, which we'll come on to a little bit later, okay? And it enables you to just, when you have more questions and you have the full time slot, it allows you to play around with things such as skipping questions and, you know, trying out different styles, etc., etc. Okay, so it's like, okay, you might say, okay, so today in QR, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do all of the graph questions first. So I'm going to say, today I'm going to sit down in QR and I'm not going to do any of the graph questions. So it allows you to try out different things, okay? And getting the full sense of the timing is really, really important. And the third thing that's really important with time practice is you do just have to feel the pressure, okay? If you guys haven't watched my QR walkthrough, you should go and have a look at that because you can see how cynical I am with the questions. And in reality, I would have no reason if the UCAT, you know, if I didn't have to do that timed, there would be no reason for me to be as cynical as I am. So what I mean by that is I literally just read the question and I just try and hunt for the info. I don't try and understand everything in the text. None of that. Just looking for keywords and just trying to read the question. But the reason why I'm doing it like that is because I know the time practice has made me do it. Okay, if I was just doing on-time practice, there'll be no reason for me to act that cynical, right? So I wouldn't be practicing the best way. I would kind of be learning. It's kind of like developing a bad habit essentially. Okay, so you really, really do have to feel the pressure, and at first it can be really demoralizing because your scores will plummet, but it is literally the only way to get better at it. Okay, and the other thing is, like I said, pattern recognition. So here you've got to, so I said about at the start when you're doing these questions, you're getting familiar with styles of questions, it's just about understanding the different patterns. So in decision making, when you see an interpreting information question, okay, I'm allowed to have a little bit more of a judgment or a little bit more leeway. Okay, here's syllogisms, okay, I'm not allowed to do that. These kind of ideas, like pattern recognizing these questions, is really, really important. And that's the idea with the time practice, that hopefully, if you've done enough of these questions, that as soon as you see one, so for example, you might see a certain type of probability question. So for those of you who've done a little bit more practice, you might know about the judging only on X or Y. Is person A better at whatever? Those kind of questions. You know exactly what you have to do. You might draw a table, you have to compare the values, etc., etc. So for everything, it's just about kind of trying to get there faster. But the way that you do it is, it's this pattern recognition, essentially. That's what kind of underpins a lot of it. Okay? And so, yeah, that's quite crucial. So the switch to time practice, like I said, you will feel a bit of a plateau, but it's important to remember what you're just trying to do is you're just trying to remember how did we do these questions before, and you're just trying to kind of really knock down the methods that you have from before and just really put them down on the page as effectively and as fast as possible. And I think practicing in the appropriate section timings will help you to get better scores overall. Okay, the only place where that's a little bit dodgy, the whole section timing thing, which I forgot to mention before, is in decision making. The reason why that is in verbal reasoning, it's just 44 questions. You know, if you just click 22 minutes, it'll give you like a collection of questions. And then, okay, that's fine. This will just be some passages. But with decision making is laid out into 6 clear sections. Okay, and how it works is in the real exam as well, the sections appear in order and you get about roughly, you get like a certain number of each question. So for example, I would say there's normally about 6 or 7 syllogisms, there's about 4 or 5 logical puzzles, maybe 4 or 5 recognizing assumptions, then there's maybe like 4 interpreting information or 5, whatever it is, a couple of Venn diagrams, quite a few Venn diagrams, maybe like 7, and then like 5 probability, for example, whatever it is. I'm just roughly saying these numbers. But the point is that if you just click the 37-minute decision making, sometimes you may find that you don't get an equal draw from each of these. So the 37-minute decision making you're sitting will not be representative of the real thing. It may be that it's heavily skewed towards towards syllogisms or towards Venn diagrams, because those are the ones that are more sets of available on Medify. So just one other thing that I want to talk about is that when you do click the practice, for 22 minutes option or whatever, and by the way, this option is the very bottom one. So if you go to Medify and you go to time practice, and then it allows you to choose like 5, 10, 15, there'll be one option at the bottom. It's a little bit dodgy. So for DM, it'll be 37. For thingy, it'll be 22 for VR. That's the one. That's the appropriate section timing. So when you click that, basically what happens behind the scenes is Medify will pull a series of questions that is roughly equal to that time. So that's why in some cases, if you choose a 26-minute QR, instead of getting 26 questions, you might get 28 questions, but then it's like 37 minutes. Okay, so it's not something gone wrong in the system. It's just that what they've done is they've assigned each question a certain time, and they're just pulling together a bunch of questions that fulfill that time period, if that makes sense. So if you're trying to get 26 minutes, it'll give you a bunch of questions that's as close to 26 minutes as possible. So as I was saying, in decision making, same idea. You might get an overload on one thing depending on what kind of how many questions you've already used up prior. So if you have a look on Medify, you'll see that there's less sets available for like the recognizing assumptions bit, which is the strongest argument questions. So those tend to get used up fast. So that's the only kind of downside to doing DM timing, like 37-minute practices, but they're still useful. Okay, they're still useful. But it just means that the DM mocks are therefore going to be even more critical. So that's another kind of benefit of doing these kind of section timings, the 26 minutes or whatever, because it basically means that each time you get like a mini mock, essentially. So instead of having to actually use up one of the proper mini mocks, which gives you a score, this one, I know it doesn't give you a converted scaled score, but it'll still give you like out of 36, it might be like 27 out of 36. Or if you're doing out of 37, it'll be like 25 out of 36, whatever it is. Okay, and then you can convert it if you really want. But yeah, that's one way to make use of it. So now then, so that's when you switch to time practice. You play around time practice for a while. You play around with time practice. You do some mocks, etc., etc. And then so your time practice is going good. You decide to do some mocks, and then in your mocks, your score may decrease. So there's kind of so this is the next plateau. So one thing that's important here is that sometimes you might feel that when you switch and this is a complaint I get all the time. It's like when I'm doing individual subtests or mini mocks, I'm fine. But when I do a full mock, it just goes out the window, right? And it's a very, very valid point. And you kind of just have to think about it. The full mock is about 2 hours, and it's some of the most intense stuff that you have to do, right? You have to do 3 really, really intense sections back to back. And then, of course, SJT it can be difficult as well. But the other 3 are harder, I would say. You have to do 3 intense sections back to back, and then you have SJT as well on top. It's a 2-hour session. It's a long time period. Okay, so one thing that naturally happens is fatigue. People get fatigued, which is why QR, which is normally, I'd probably say QR is the easiest of the 3 sections, not including SJT, but QR scores that people get in their actual exam can often be lower than what they're getting in practice because of the fatigue idea, because it's the 3rd section, so you're already really tired from the VR and the DM. Okay, so how do you overcome fatigue then? So the first thing is you've got to build resistance. Okay, and how do you build resistance? You practice doing sections back to back. So going back to the idea of time practice. So I told you guys to do like a 22-minute VR, do 37-minute DM, etc., etc. But what normally most people do is they do a 22-minute VR. Okay, then they'll take a break and review the questions. Okay, so then now their brain's on cooldown mode. Then they'll go on and do 37-minute DM. They'll take a break and they'll review the questions. I think you guys see where I'm going with this. So instead of doing that, what I would suggest is you do 22-minute VR, mark the answers, whatever. Don't check the answers. Give yourself like a 1-minute break, represent like as you would get in the real thing, and jump straight into 37-minute decision making. And then once you've done both of those back to back, then you can review all the answers at the end. So now you've done 2 back to back, and that will help to build some of that resistance fatigue. It will help you to get used to it. Okay. And so once you do 2 back to back, then if you are not feeling too tired after doing 2 back to back, over the next few days, maybe you can switch to doing 3 back to back. And then finally you can switch to doing all 4 back to back. And eventually then you're just simulating a real mock. Okay, so everything that we do in practice is about simulating the real thing. This is really, really important to understand. So that's really, really crucial. I think that's one of the big points where people struggle is this idea of fatigue. Okay, because it's very, very easy to fatigue easily. It's very, very easy to fatigue. But the best way is to build resistance. When you're practicing, make sure that, you sit down in the morning and instead of doing a 30-minute block and going off for 15 minutes, tell yourself, okay, this is a 2-hour block. I'm going to do 22-minute VR. Okay, I'm going to take a pause and then I'm going to do a 37-minute DM, and then I'm going to review questions for the hour or whatever. I'm not saying you have to do it for the hour, but I'm just saying, you know what I mean? Like, allocate some time out for it. And then over time, build up until you're doing all 4 sections back to back. So, for some people, it's not necessarily just, you don't just necessarily get plateau and you switch directly to mocks. It might be that you've done a couple of mocks, okay, and let's say you're fine with the whole idea of fatigue and resistance, and okay, that's going fine, but your scores just still don't seem to improve, right? It's not necessarily because you're tired or anything, but your scores are still not improving. And this is where the next thing is, which is exam technique, okay? So I know I've talked a lot about technique before, but exam technique is something which is critical. So what exam technique, what I define it as anyways, is it's not how to do a question, okay? It's not how do you do syllogisms, how do you do interpreting information. It's nothing to do with the actual technique of the question, but it's the technique of the exam. So that basically means, which questions are you doing? Why are you doing those questions? Are you doing the right questions? Are you skipping appropriately? Are you flagging appropriately? All of these little things. It might not seem like much, right? But it really, really does make a big impact. So that's one of the things that I think is really useful when we're doing lessons as well. So if you guys have made it this far through the video, and if you guys, you know, are potentially feeling like you're hitting some kind of plateau or feeling stuck, please feel free to drop me an email, and we can discuss something like that. We can have a lesson where I think one of the best things that I can do is actually analyze where you're going wrong. Okay, so what are you doing that's letting you down? What are you doing that's hindering you, and how should you switch it up? Okay, so that the idea of the exam technique. Okay, so let's say in decision making, I said that not all questions are worth 1 mark. So we know that syllogisms and interpreting information are worth 2 marks, right? So syllogisms and interpreting info are worth 2 marks, okay? So some people really don't like interpreting information. I hate it personally. It's my weakest subset within decision making. But what they'll do is they will say, okay, you know what? I'm just going to skip all the interpreting information questions because I know with that time I can do other questions better. Okay, fine. But remember, you have to do a cost-benefit analysis. In fact, interpreting information is 2 marks. Okay, I'm happy for people to skip logical puzzles because they're long and they're only 1 mark. But with interpreting information, it's not necessarily as long as logical puzzles, and they are 2 marks at the same time as well. So you kind of just have to almost get used to it in a way. Like, there are like unskippable questions, if that makes sense. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to do every single syllogism question and then every single interpreting information question. That's not the point. But what I mean is, like, obviously, you know, the idea of strategy is important, like which questions you do. And like I said, I can discuss that more on a personal basis because it does definitely change depending on where your strengths lie. But it's really, really important to be able to consider, actually, you know what? It probably doesn't make sense for me to skip that many interpreting informations. It probably doesn't make sense for me to leave 2 of the syllogisms behind because, you know what, the arrow method is quite good and I probably should be able to get those marks. Or, you know, even if I got 1 out of 2 on the syllogisms, I can do that fairly fast and it's way better than spending that time on logical puzzles. So you kind of have to decide amongst yourself. Okay. The other things as well with exam technique. So the other things are with VR, for example, one of the things that people do is they just do all the true, false, can't tells first of all. That works for some people. Me personally, not that big a fan. Okay. And I think I mentioned that in my VR video as well. For me, it's the passage that dictates whether I do a question or not. So once again, try out different things. And then this is another reason why practice is really, really important. Right? So, for example, in football, when teams are training, they will train set-piece routines or they will train corner routines. And the reason why they train it is not necessarily because they're going to use every single routine that they train, but because they see, okay, does this work? Okay, do we have something here that could actually be translated over when we're actually playing a game, when we're actually playing our rivals or whatever? And it's the same thing in practice. So you say, okay, you know what? Let me try do all the true, false, can't tells. Does that work in this mock? Okay, it works in 1 mock. Okay, let me try it in another mock. Actually, you know what? This is quite a good method. It's sustainable. It works for me. Okay, great. You do it for you. Another person might find that doing just the true, false, can't tells is really difficult. They might find that, because they might think that, you know, they might feel that true, false, can't tells are a little bit more ambiguous or whatever at times. Absolutely fine. Everyone has their own personal strategy, but it's really important to analyze it. Okay, so at this stage, like when you're late into your prep, like you'll know the techniques, you'll know the tips. It's just about choosing which questions to do. Because obviously, even by knowing the techniques and tips, you know, I'm not expecting, like, it's just not possible to expect every single person to be able to do every single question rapidly. Like, no one can do that. Like, I have weaknesses, everyone has weaknesses, but it's just about playing to your strength. That's what's important, and analyzing that strategy. So in VR, like I said, it's about, okay, which passages do I like to do? Me personally, I prefer the scientific ones, and I really hate anything about politics and economics, so I know I skip those immediately. Okay, and then in terms of kind of other ones as well. So in terms of QR, currency questions, for example, are not my strongest forte, and perhaps tax at times can be a little bit dodgy. But I know that there are other questions that I'm better at. I know percentage change questions I really enjoy doing, and I know that I can do them fast, so I know I'll focus on them. And just ideas like that. So play around, right? Play around trying different styles and see what works for you. And the last thing is about deciding where to focus. So this thing is really, really important. And it's probably the last thing that I want to mention. And it's this kind of idea that the Ucat isn't necessarily scaled like linearly. It's not like, okay, you go at one point, you go at one mark, you go at 10 points. Okay. It's more of like it's more rewarding towards the top and the bottom, essentially. Okay, in the sense that in the early marks you gain are going to be, more rewarding, and then towards the middle, which is where most people score, 1 mark doesn't really mean a lot. But then towards the top ends, 1 mark is going to mean more points. Okay, so importantly, obviously, the bit that we want to focus on is the top end. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is, let's say in VR you're at 22 out of 44, but let's say in QR you're at 30 out of 36. Okay, going from 22 out of 44 to 23 out of 44 might give you a point boost of 10. Okay, that's fine, that's cool. But going from 31 out of 36 to 30 out of 36 to 31 out of 36 might give you a point boost of 20 or even 30. So do you see the relative gain that you get for one question, for 1 mark, is a lot more? And so this is really, really crucial to think about. Okay, and it's really, really vital to understand. And it means that, yes, of course, you should always try focus on your weak areas. But in the Ucat, you can also try focusing on your strong areas and really push them up to see if you can get to those high scores. Does that make sense? And this is really, really important. So those are kind of like my main ideas. And I think most of you guys will probably be in this latter category, in the kind of mock practice area where perhaps your scores are not going up as you want them to. And the very last thing that I want to say is that students, when they are sitting the Ucat, they often think that this is what it looks like. They think that over time, just the more work you put in, your score will go up. But it's not necessarily only about that, though. Okay, and the reason why is because if it was about that, then no one would complain about the Ucat, because med students work very hard. Like pretty much every single med student who actually wants to properly do medicine works very hard. And that means that if this is exactly how it worked, no one would ever get a bad Ucat score. But the Ucat is more like this. Okay, it's more like that. Okay, and maybe I'm exaggerating for effect, but you can see the overall trend will be upwards, but you'll have bad days, you'll have good days. But the important thing is to not get discouraged. You just have to continue going, and you have to hopefully continue going to a point where you become consistent around a new score. So you can see when this person started out here, they were, dabbling around this region down here. Okay, but then over time, yes, they're still fluctuating up here. They're still fluctuating, but they're fluctuating around a much higher score. So their baseline has moved up, and that's the idea. Okay, you can never expect your score to only linearly go up. It's just not possible. Due to a variety of factors, just because of things like personal tiredness, like on the day, you might have a bad day, but also things like how hard a subtest is, or how hard a mock is, or how difficult that question is compared to the last questions, etc., etc. Okay, so there's a lot of different things, but most importantly, like I said, you've got to have that kind of idea of, okay, where am I going wrong? Okay, and importantly, this is a quote that I will tell every single one of my students, which is, nothing changes if nothing changes. Okay, I'm just going to write it out for effect here, but nothing changes if nothing changes. So if you're doing the same thing and you get the same results, and you continue doing the same thing and you're asking yourself, why am I getting the same results? It's a bit of a futile question, right? You've got to change something up. And that's where all this comes into. Strategy, exam technique, right? You can't just expect to consistently keep doing the same thing and just magically improve. Okay, maybe it might work for some people. Maybe something might click, okay? But overall, you probably have to, switch something up, okay? But I do want to reassure you guys, okay? Like, you're not the only people in the world to have gone through this, right? Hundreds, thousands, probably a million at this stage. Millions of students have gone through the Ucat before, and they've all been fine, okay? But importantly, it's about continuing to work at it, continuing to keep at it. And, please do drop me an email, drop me a message if you would like any further help. And we definitely can, analyze your mocks, analyze where you're going wrong. Kind of, one of the things I can do is I can sit with you and kind of really highlight areas where I think you can improve or get faster at, or things you can switch and change up. Okay, so I hope this video was helpful. I just wanted to, I guess it's not really my normal style of video, but I think it's really, really important to stress that you guys are going to be okay, but, plateaus are normal, completely normal. So is fluctuations. It's just about learning how you can get over them. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. And as always, please do leave a comment if this was helpful, and let me know what you'd like to see in the upcoming days. Okay, take care. See you guys later.